Hey everyone, I'm Eliza, and I'm an ex-Amish girl from Pennsylvania. I left the community when I was 19, and that was 6 years ago now. Today I'm going to talk about something that I get asked about constantly, and it's a question that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I think it's important to answer honestly. How do Amish teens learn about intimacy and relationships when they don't have internet, TV, or really any access to the outside world and the information that most people take for granted? Before I get into this, I want to be clear about something. I'm going to be honest, but I'm also going to be respectful. This isn't about sensationalizing or making fun of the Amish. This is about sharing the reality of what it was like growing up in that world. And I think it's important for people to understand because it affected me in ways I didn't even realize until I left. So let's start with the basics. In the Amish world, there is no formal sex education. None. There are no classes, no talks, no books, nothing like what you would get in a public school health class. The topic of sex and intimacy is considered deeply private and not something to be discussed openly, especially not with children or unmarried young people. The general attitude is that you'll figure it out when you need to, which is after you're married. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but surely parents talk to their kids about this stuff privately, right? And the answer is sometimes, but not in the way you'd expect. Most Amish parents do not sit down and have what we would call the talk with their children. It's considered embarrassing and inappropriate. The assumption is that young people will learn what they need to know through observation and through the natural course of life. And that's where farm life comes in. This is something that people from outside the Amish world often don't think about, but it's actually a huge part of how Amish children learn about reproduction and the basics of where babies come from. When you grow up on a farm, you're around animals constantly. You see cows being bred, you see horses mating, you see chickens, pigs, goats, all of it. You watch animals give birth. By the time you're 10 or 12 years old, you've witnessed the entire reproductive cycle of multiple species dozens of times. So Amish kids aren't completely clueless about the mechanics of reproduction. They understand the basic biology because they've seen it with their own eyes. But here's the thing. There's a huge difference between watching animals and understanding human relationships, human intimacy, human emotions, consent, all the things that make human sexuality completely different from animal breeding. That gap doesn't really get filled. What you end up with is this weird situation where Amish teenagers know how babies are made in a purely mechanical sense, but they have almost no education about relationships, emotional intimacy, healthy communication between partners, consent, any of it. It's all just assumed that once you're married, you'll figure it out together. Now let's talk about courtship, because that's where things get interesting. In the Amish world, dating starts around age 16 for most communities. Young people meet at youth gatherings, singings on Sunday nights, that kind of thing. If a boy is interested in a girl, he'll ask if he can drive her home in his buggy after the singing. That's typically how it starts. Dating is supposed to be secretive. You don't advertise who you're seeing. You don't bring your boyfriend or girlfriend around your family in an obvious way. The relationship stays pretty private until you're ready to announce an engagement. And during the dating phase, physical contact is extremely limited. Holding hands might be okay, depending on how conservative your specific community is. Kissing is generally frowned upon before marriage, though some couples do it anyway. Anything beyond that is absolutely forbidden and would be considered a serious sin. But here's where it gets complicated. In some Amish communities, there's a practice called bundling or bed courtship. This is where a young couple, after they've been dating for a while, will lie in bed together fully clothed, usually in the girl's family home with her parents in the house, and they'll talk and spend time together. The idea is that they're supposed to keep their clothes on and not do anything sexual. It's meant to allow them private time to talk and get to know each other in a culture where privacy is really hard to come by. Now, I need to be honest with you. Bundling is controversial even within the Amish world. Not all communities practice it. In the more conservative groups, it doesn't happen at all. In the communities where it does happen, there are different rules. Some families require a board down the middle of the bed. Some require the couple to sleep in sleeping bags. The idea is to create a physical barrier. But here's the reality. Sometimes young couples do cross those boundaries. They're teenagers, they're alone in a bed together, and human nature is human nature. When that happens, if it comes out, there's a lot of shame involved. If a girl gets pregnant before marriage, which does happen though it's rare, the couple is expected to confess to the church and then get married quickly. So, to answer the question of how Amish teens learn about intimacy, the honest answer is they mostly don't. Not in any structured or healthy way. They learn bits and pieces from observing farm animals. They maybe overhear whispered conversations between married women. They might have an older sibling who drops hints. But there's no comprehensive education. There's no discussion of consent or communication or what makes a healthy relationship. There's definitely no discussion of women's pleasure or sexual health or any of that. The whole topic is just shrouded in silence and shame. And let me tell you, when I left the Amish and entered the English world, this was one of the most shocking gaps in my education. I was 19 years old, and I realized I knew almost nothing about my own body. I didn't understand basic things about female anatomy and reproductive health. I had never heard terms like consent or boundaries in a relationship context. I had this vague understanding that sex was something that happened after marriage, but I had no framework for understanding healthy intimacy or relationships. I remember going to a doctor for the first time after I left, a regular gynecologist, and being so embarrassed and confused because I didn't understand what was normal or what questions I should be asking. The doctor was very kind, but I could tell she was a little shocked at how little I knew. That's when it really hit me how much I had missed out on in terms of basic life education. And it's not just about sex, it's about relationships in general. In the Amish world, dating is very structured and goal-oriented. You date with the intention of getting married, period. There's no concept of casual dating or figuring out what you want or learning about yourself through relationships. You meet someone, you court them for a few months to maybe a year, you get engaged, you get married. That's the path. And if you're not ready to get married, you don't date. The problem with this system is that young people end up getting married without really knowing their partner. You've maybe spent a few dozen evenings together, always in controlled environments, always with the weight of community expectations on you, and then suddenly you're married and you're expected to build a life together and be intimate with this person, and you barely know them. When I was still Amish, I saw several young couples get married, and then within the first year or two, you could tell they were struggling. They weren't compatible. They didn't know how to communicate. They were navigating intimacy for the first time with no guidance, no privacy, because they were usually living with one set of parents, and no way to get help because you don't talk about marital problems outside the marriage. Divorce is not an option in the Amish church, so these couples were just stuck trying to figure it out. Now, I want to be fair and say that not every Amish marriage is unhappy. Plenty of Amish couples have good marriages and figure things out and are content, but the lack of education and preparation puts a lot of unnecessary pressure and confusion on young people who are already dealing with a massive life transition. Let me also talk about something that I think is really important. In a culture where sex education is non-existent and the topic is taboo, it becomes very difficult to address problems when they arise. If a young woman is experiencing pain during intercourse, which can happen for many medical reasons, she might not know who to talk to or that it's not normal and she should see a doctor. If someone is being pressured or coerced in a relationship, they might not have the language or framework to understand that what's happening is not okay. If there's abuse, whether physical or sexual, the silence around these topics makes it so much harder for victims to speak up or get help. I'm not saying these problems are unique to the Amish. They happen in every culture, but the lack of education and the culture of silence makes them harder to address. And that's something that I think needs to be talked about more openly. So what happens when an Amish person does have questions? Well, it depends. Some young women might work up the courage to ask their mother or an older married sister. The answers they get are usually vague and euphemistic. You might hear something like, "Your husband will show you what to do," or "It's natural, you'll understand when the time comes." Not exactly helpful. Some young men might talk to their friends, but since none of them know much more than each other, you end up with a lot of misinformation being passed around. And here's something interesting. During Rumspringa, which is the period when Amish teenagers are allowed to experience the outside world before deciding whether to be baptized, some young people do get access to more information. If they get a cell phone, which a lot of Rumspringa youth do secretly, they might look things up online. They might talk to English friends who have a more normal education. They might even watch TV or movies at a friend's house and pick up information that way. But Rumspringa is also a really confusing time because you're getting all this information thrown at you with no context or guidance, and you're still expected to maintain Amish values. So it's not exactly a healthy way to learn either. When I left the Amish, one of the first things I did was start educating myself. I went to the library and checked out books on health and relationships. I talked to friends who were patient enough to answer my questions without making me feel stupid. I went to a free health clinic where they gave me information about reproductive health and birth control and all the things I had never learned. It was overwhelming and embarrassing, but it was also empowering. I realized that having knowledge about my own body and my own choices was a form of freedom I had never experienced before. Looking back now, I can see how much the lack of education affected me and so many other Amish young people. We were told that innocence was a virtue, and in some ways I understand that perspective. But there's a difference between innocence and ignorance. Innocence is a choice. Ignorance is a lack of choice. And when you keep young people in ignorance about their own bodies and healthy relationships, you're not protecting them. You're leaving them vulnerable. I want to be clear. I'm not trying to bash the Amish or say that everyone needs to leave like I did. There are aspects of Amish life that are beautiful and valuable. The sense of community, the simplicity, the focus on family, those are real things. But this particular aspect, the silence around intimacy and relationships, and the lack of education, that's something I think does more harm than good. If there's one thing I hope people take away from this video, it's that education is not the enemy of innocence. Teaching young people about their bodies, about healthy relationships, about consent and communication, that's not corrupting them. That's preparing them for life. And the Amish reluctance to provide that education, while it comes from a place of wanting to protect young people, actually ends up leaving them unprepared and sometimes in difficult or even dangerous situations. That's my honest answer to how Amish teens learn about intimacy. The truth is, they mostly don't. They piece together bits of information from farm life, from whispered conversations, from assumptions and expectations, and then they're expected to figure it out on their own after marriage. And for some people, that works out okay. But for a lot of people, including me, it left huge gaps that took years to fill after leaving. If you found this honest perspective helpful, please share it with others. And if you're ex-Amish or from any community that doesn't provide comprehensive education, know that it's okay to have questions and seek out information. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's part of taking control of your own life and your own health. Thanks for watching.